Continuing our coverage now of the expanded strike with our auto panel. Joining us, former UAW spokesperson Brian Rothenberg and Wayne State professor Marick Masters. Thanks for being here once again.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, the UAW, as we said, has expanded their strike against GM and Stellantis, but not Ford. Let's start with you. Are you surprised by this move and these developments today?
I expected this kind of asymmetrical response, given that they've made progress with one company. It's a bit of a carrot and stick approach, saying that if you've made progress with us, we'll treat you more favorably. But for those that haven't, there are going to be consequences. I think it's interesting they hit the parts distribution to take an aim at the customer side of the business and also a part of the business in which they derive revenue. So this is something that will pinch, but it's not a full body blow.
All right. Now, Brian, it seems like even before the strike began that the relationship at the negotiating table was a little bit better with Ford. For a while, they were the only ones really making counteroffers. Do you think this means we can expect a deal with Ford soon?
Well, as we talked about before, there will be a deal. It's an employment contract. I do think that they're getting closer with Ford. It does signal that. And that is a good thing. I think it helps that Unifor had moved the dial and sort of, in a way, set a pattern for some of the economics, not all of them, because Canada has national health care. But I would say, in response to Marick, it's interesting what they did choose, because the parts depots, first of all, there are more parts depots all across the nation. So from a public relations standpoint, you're getting more attention and more press at the local level when you're all across the nation. The other thing is, as Marick had said, the issue there is that it affects parts, which means that customers will complain they can't get their cars fixed. It puts that kind of pressure on. But it isn't, stopping the F-150, the most profitable vehicle, or stopping the Ram truck series. It leaves that threat of a strike still.
Brian, is it a bad look here for the UAW by any means that the Canadian auto workers were able to figure this out and avoid a strike, yet here UAW workers have not been able to and are now expanding the strike?
I don't know that you can judge it in this day and age, just because it's so complicated in so many different ways. I do think, the bombshell report that came out this morning, I don't think that's a surprise. I think that it was pretty clear from the start that the union knew this was the salad days of profits for these companies, and that they were coming up with a strategy to try to extract as much as they can. And I think they're doing that with the threat of a strike, knowing that's the most powerful tool that they have. But, we'll see how it ends up. You got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, to quote Kenny Rogers,
Very nice. Well, this is a significant escalation. And as you mentioned, Marick, it's not a deadly blow to the big three by any means, but they can't ignore it. And pretty soon, consumers won't be able to ignore it necessarily either. If they need to get a part or a repair at their dealership and they can't get that piece, is this potentially leading to backlash against the UAW?
Well, I think the level of strike activity is relatively too minor now to cause that kind of a backlash. I think you're going to have to see much more of an economic impact. You're going to have to hit the parts plants and effectively shut the companies down. And that would have an immediate large impact on so many different constituencies. And I think I look at this as, the skeleton of an agreement is there with Ford. And if they can get a deal with Ford, I think they'll take that to the other two companies, and that'll put a lot of pressure on them to make some sort of a similar agreement.
But Ford, as well as Fain, have both admitted while they've made some progress, they remain far apart on key economic issues. When you look at where things stand right here, right now, who has most to lose here? Is it the UAW workers, the union, or is it the big three?
Well, I think in the immediate term, the workers are the ones that have the most to lose because their jobs are on the line. I think in the longer term, the companies and the workers, because they depend on the company's existence for their jobs. And so I think if the companies were strike a bargain that was untenable, as they say, that escalated their labor costs to the point where they couldn't be competitive, then they would be jeopardizing their future.
Brian, we've heard about temporary layoffs since the strike began, and we do expect more of those to happen. With, this many more plants involved, though it wasn't a significant escalation in people, we're talking only a few thousand more workers. Do you think that will become a bigger problem for the union?
Well, as it grows and as this starts to happen, yes, there will be more people involved. There are going to be fights over whether they are eligible for unemployment. The union, I'm sure, will take care of folks with the strike fund. I think the same argument over sub pay might come up. And I think the bigger issue is going to be some of the suppliers that are on the edge, as the Biden administration has, worried about. But in the end, these workers are going to win. It's already a pretty rich contract, and it should be. They have huge profits. So this is a solvable problem. It's not like the companies don't have any cash here, and there is an opportunity here to satisfy both sides. That collective bargaining will and can work given the money available.
Brian, when you look at where things are in these contract negotiations, what do you think it'll take at this point to find a match, to get to a point where both sides can agree?
Well, I do think that the fact that Ford might be close will give a guideline to the other companies. I think that certainly will have an impact with GM. I worry about Stellantis because their leadership and their board is really a foreign leadership and a foreign board. So the real question is, will their leadership hear us outside the Jeep plant in Toledo, Ohio, when they're in Paris or in Amsterdam or wherever they are? The Netherlands, I think, is their base.
Marick, if there is no deal with any of the big three in the next several days, based on this first escalation from round 1 to round 2, what do you expect that next move to be?
Well, I don't think he has a whole lot of time, Sean Fain, before he has to ramp up the pressure, because people are going to be tired being out on strike for 2 or 3 weeks, no matter how few workers are involved. And 20,000 is a lot. When you think about it, they're going to say, this hasn't worked. We're going to have to go full throttle and see if we can pressure these companies. But I'd like to echo what Brian said, because Stellantis could very well be the wild card in this. It's less dependent on North America, and it has a much different outlook, and it probably has the money to give the workers a lot. And I would think that if you really wanted to tip this over the top and get the deal done, you're going to have to come up with 30% or more in a general wage increase.
Well, as we've talked about, 41 total plants as the UAW has expanded their strike against the Detroit Big Three. Most importantly, Stellantis and GM today. Former UAW spokesperson Brian Rothenberg and Professor Marick Masters, we appreciate you being with us tonight.